Welcome back to the Hadley Running YouTube channel. I am Hadley Running's avatar Miles, and on today's episode, we are going to talk about threshold training and how it helps us build our aerobic power endurance. As we discussed in episode 5, in our building of running fitness, our stress workouts fit into two categories. One is aerobic resistance, which builds our endurance, and one is aerobic capacity, which builds the power and efficiency of our engine. Aerobic capacity has two subcategories. One is aerobic power building, which we discussed in episode 7, and the other is aerobic power endurance, which is another name for threshold training, which we're talking about today. While aerobic power building builds the power of our engine, aerobic power endurance builds the stamina of our engine, our ability to operate at faster paces for extended periods of time. In order to build our aerobic power endurance, we work on improving two critical thresholds in our body, our lactate threshold and our aerobic threshold. Let's take a closer look at each. Lactate threshold is the fastest pace at which we can run before our body starts producing too much waste products in the bloodstream, called lactate, for the body to process and get rid of. So if we run faster than this pace, our body gets into an increasingly toxic environment. In practical terms, this is the pace a well-trained runner can hold for 60 minutes in an all-out race effort. This is also between 88% and 92% of our maximum heart rate. Aerobic threshold is the pace at which our breathing rate and calorie burn rate significantly spike upwards. Just above our aerobic threshold pace, our breathing is noticeably heavier than it is just below it. This pace is between 84% and 88% of our maximum heart rate, and in most runners, this is between 4% and 5% slower than our lactate threshold. Or another way to think of it is our aerobic threshold determines our aerobic efficiency. We have 4 different types of workouts that we do to help us improve our paces at our lactate threshold and our aerobic threshold. We can do all of these 4 workouts for either threshold. Those 4 workouts are threshold repeats, threshold tempo runs, threshold progression runs, and threshold waves runs. Each of these workouts work the targeted threshold from a slightly different angle, allowing us to get maximum gains. Let's take a closer look at each. Threshold repeats are repeated runs done at either threshold pace, with a short recovery jog between each repeat. The duration of each repeats should be between 5 and 10 minutes if working our lactate threshold, and between 10 and 20 minutes if we are working our aerobic threshold. The total duration of all the repeats should be between 30 and 40 minutes if working our lactate threshold, and between 60 and 80 minutes if working our aerobic threshold. Our recovery jog between repeats is 20% of the repeat duration. So if our repeats at 5 minutes in duration, our recovery jog would be 1 minute. An example of this workout for working our lactate threshold would be to run 5 repeats of 7.5 minutes at our lactate threshold pace with a 1.5 minute recovery jog between repeats. For working our aerobic threshold, those times would double to 15-minute repeats with a 3-minute recovery jog, and the pace is slowed to our aerobic threshold. Threshold tempo runs are continuous runs done at a smooth, steady pace at or very near the threshold pace we are working. If working on our lactate threshold, these tempo runs would be between 24 and 30 minutes in duration. If working on our aerobic threshold, these tempo runs would be between 48 and 60 minutes in duration. These are one singular run done with a warm-up jog before and a cool-down jog afterwards. Examples would be a 27-minute continuous run at our lactate threshold pace or a 54-minute run at our aerobic threshold pace. Threshold progression runs follow the same length guidelines as normal threshold tempo runs do, with durations of 24 to 30 minutes for LT and 48 to 60 minutes for AT. But on a progression run, we start the run at 4 to 5% slower than our threshold pace and gradually increase the intensity and pace during the run until we finish the run at 3 to 4% faster than our threshold pace. For example, if our lactate threshold pace is 7 minutes per mile and we are doing a 27-minute lactate threshold progression run, We would start the run at about 7 minutes and 20 seconds pace and gradually increase the pace as we went until finishing at 6 minute and 45-second pace. Threshold wave runs are also continuous runs that follow the same length guidelines as normal threshold tempo runs do, with durations of 24 to 30 minutes for LT and 48 to 60 minutes for AT. But we break the run up into either 8 or 10 segments, or between 2.5 and 3 minutes for LT wave runs and between 5 and 6 minutes for AT wave runs. And we alternate our paces on the segments between 4 to 5% slower than the threshold and 3 to 4% faster than the threshold. So an example of an LT wave run, if our LT pace was 7 minutes per mile, would be a 30-minute continuous run broken into 10 3-minute segments, and alternating the pace on the segments between 7 minutes and 20 seconds pace and 6 minutes and 45 seconds pace. Always start this workout with the slower pace segment first. Let's review a few tips that will help you execute and get the most out of your threshold workouts. Be sure to start the first 5 to 10% of the workout conservatively, allowing your body a few minutes to ease into the paces. Focus on staying as smooth and relaxed as you can while running these paces. This is a very beneficial skill, but one that has to be practiced to master. Be sure to maintain a steady and even rhythm with a cadence between 170 and 190 strides per minute. Most of the fall-off in paces as a runner get tired manifests itself as a drop-off in cadence. So focusing on maintaining your rhythm is a great way to combat that. If using heart rate as your guide on these workouts, be sure to remember that it will take the first few minutes of the run or first repeat for the body to ramp up into the desired heart rate zone. Don't push too hard too quick to get it there. How often we work each threshold in relation to each other depends on the phase of training we are in. If we are in the fundamental phase of training, which is the first 50 to 60% of serious training, we want to work on our lactate threshold more frequently than our aerobic threshold. The mixture between LT to AT workouts should be between 2 to 1 and 4 to 1 in this phase. In the specific phase of training, as we approach our goal race, we will gravitate to doing more work on whichever threshold is closer to our goal race pace. So if our goal race is a marathon, then our ratio of threshold workouts in the specific phase will flip to between 2 to 1 and 4 to 1 in favor of aerobic threshold workouts. This concludes our episode exploring threshold training. Thank you for watching and joining us. If you liked this video, please give us a thumbs up and also be sure to subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate it. We strive to put an episode twice a week on Monday and Fridays. Our Monday episodes cover training theory and advice, like today's threshold training discussion, and our Friday episodes cover other helpful topics in the world of running. Thanks and happy running.